Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're diving into the turning points that didn't just make worldwide headlines, they changed history forever. And we're starting with political mistakes that altered everything.
Truman claimed he never lost a night of sleep over his decision, and to this day the United States has never apologized for it. Still, the horror of Hiroshima and Nagasaki firmly cemented atomic bombs as the world's weapons of absolute last resort.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're looking at the biggest blunders made by world leaders and political figures that had significant historical consequences for their nations and across the globe.
Despite facing a Red Army with almost 3 million men on its western border, Hitler is confident of victory.
Russia selling Alaska. In the 1700s, Russian citizens arrived in Alaska, primarily as fur trappers, later settling up a colony. However, by the 1850s, the local sea otter population was nearly gone. Russia had further issues due to the Crimean War. Plus, there was the threat of gold being found in Alaska, as the region was difficult to defend. So Emperor Alexander II negotiated with the U.S. to sell Alaska. Due to the American Civil War taking over the government's attention, the deal wasn't officially struck until 1867, when they paid Russia $7.2 million, around $154 million in 2025. Alexander was proved right when gold was found in Alaska in the late 1890s, followed by oil in 1968. However, it also meant losing a lot of money. Charles I's ship money.
The king levied a forced loan and imprisoned those who refused to pay.
Believing he had a divine right to rule England after his ascension in 1625, Charles I began clashing with Parliament. In order to circumvent the politics, he initiated ship money in 1628. This was a tax that allowed monarchs to force coastal areas to furnish ships during war. However, Charles wanted it every year regardless.
Parliament tried to stop him, but in 1629, Charles simply dismissed Parliament and didn't recall it for another 11 years.
Most people were furious with this display of power. John Hampden, a member of Parliament, refused to pay. In 1638, Hampden's trial ruled that 7 of the 12 judges found the tax legal. Because 5 didn't, Charles's reputation was destroyed. This was a key factor in the English Civil Wars, which ended with Charles being executed in 1649 and England becoming a republic.
Lord, let us now thy servant depart in peace according to thy word. For mine eyes have seen thy salvation, which thou hast prepared before the face of all people. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost, as was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be.
William Seward takes a trip.
Secretary of State William H. Seward often seemed to dominate the cabinet. He expected to be president himself, and it took him a while to accept that Lincoln, not he, was in charge.
Running up to the 1860 Republican National Convention, there was one standout name that seemed destined to become the party's presidential nominee, Seward. New York's senator and former governor was known for his anti-slavery views.
Seward also met many slaves, hiding them here in the downstairs kitchen, which became a stop on the Underground Railroad.
However, this caused issues with some groups. In 1859, Seward took a 9-month trip to Europe, meeting Queen Victoria and the Middle East. When he returned to the U.S., he was blamed for inspiring abolitionist John Brown's raid in Harper's Ferry, Virginia, which ended with his execution. At the convention, Seward dominated the first ballot, but by the second, delegates began switching to Abraham Lincoln, closing the gap. In the end, Lincoln won the nomination and later the presidency, leading to the Civil War and the Union's victory in 1865. Guadalupe Conference. West backs Khomeini.
Grand Ayatollah Khomeini, a leading religious scholar, became the spiritual leader of the Iranian Revolution.
In January 1979, France's President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, U.S. President Jimmy Carter, Chancellor of West Germany Helmut Schmidt, and British Prime Minister James Callaghan met in Guadalupe to discuss global issues. One of the main topics was the Iranian Revolution, which had been going on for a year, with the seed sown decades ago. The Western leaders decided not to help Iran's monarch, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, believing the situation would get worse. A month later, Pahlavi, who'd left the country following the conference, abolished the monarchy. This enabled Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini to take control, who soon proved he wasn't an ally of the West.
The constitution was written around Khomeini's ideology of velayat-e-faqih, a religious guardianship of the country.
As he supported the Iran hostage crisis at the U.S. Embassy, even calling the country, quote, Great Satan. Napoleon executing the Duke of Enghien.
How would you like to approach this, monsieur? with style and good manners, we shall knock politely on the front door.
In 1804, shortly before he became Emperor of France, but still the first consul of the French Republic, Napoleon Bonaparte heard about a conspiracy of royalists looking to re-establish the monarchy. This caused him to issue the arrest of Louis-Antoine, the Duke of Enghien, and a member of the House of Bourbon. However, there was no evidence Antoine was involved. Regardless, he was executed.
Fire!
This caused shockwaves across global royal families, leading Russia to backtrack on potential peace with Napoleon and siding against France alongside Austria and Britain. The Antoine incident severely dented Napoleon's reputation, making his first rule appear more tyrannical. This caused a loss of support for France and his final defeat in 1815. Philip II handing the Spanish Armada to the 7th Duke of Medina Sidonia.
We can't get anywhere near them.
We have to break their formation. It's our only chance.
If you planned a mass naval invasion of a country, you'd give the responsibility to an experienced and decorated officer. However, that wasn't the direction Philip II of Spain took. After Mary, Queen of Scots, was executed in 1587, Philip sought to overthrow England's Queen Elizabeth I to restore Catholicism in the Protestant country. So, in 1588, he initiated the Spanish Armada, a fleet to invade the country. Philip entrusted its leadership to Alonso de Guzman y Sotomayor, 7th Duke of Medina Sidonia. However, he had no military experience on land or sea. This, mixed with bad weather, poor communication, and disease spreading, allowed the English Navy to destroy the fleet.
To such religious men, it must feel like God himself has turned against Spain.
Treaty of Versailles harsh terms.
If you think of September the 11th, but then you think of September the 11th style casualties every day for 4 years, then you begin to get some kind of feeling of what the sort of trauma was that existed in the Western countries and the Allied countries at the time, particularly in Britain and in France, which had never known levels of casualties of the kind that they'd experienced between 1914 and 1918.
Following the armistice in 1918, ending World War I, the Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1919. The document declared Germany was seen as the main instigator of the war.
We were journeying to Paris not merely to liquidate the war, but to found a new order in Europe. We were preparing not peace only, but eternal peace. There was about us the halo of some divine mission. We must be alert, stern, righteous, and ascetic, for we were bent on doing great, permanent, and noble things.
As such, they received severe punishment. From 1921, Germany had to pay the Allies around $33 billion in reparations, nearly $582 billion in 2025. This had a devastating impact on Germany's economy, exacerbated by the Great Depression. The treaty also carved up the German Empire's territories and forced them to demilitarize. The harshness of the treaty, which angered German citizens, is believed to have been a key instigator in Adolf Hitler's rise to power, sparking World War II.
For 6 months, it was the closest we have ever had to a world government, and I don't suspect we'll ever have anything like it again. If you can imagine all the most powerful people in the world here, prime ministers, kings, presidents, foreign secretaries, plus all the people who came because they were here.
Atahualpa getting intoxicated.
In less than a century, his people had built the biggest empire ever known in the Americas at that time, and his death signaled the end of that great empire.
In 1532, following a civil war, Atahualpa became the monarch of the Inca Empire, one of the most powerful to have existed. That same year, Spain began its conquest of Peru and the Incan Empire. One of the leaders of the conquest, Francisco Pizarro, invited Atahualpa to a meeting. However, according to some accounts, the monarch had been drinking heavily during the journey. When he met with Friar Vicente de Valverde, Atahualpa threw his religious book back at him, causing Valverde to call for Pizarro, who had his soldiers hiding, to attack. With the element of surprise and advanced weaponry, the Spanish destroyed Atahualpa's army without losing a soldier. They captured Atahualpa, leading to his execution and essentially the end of the Incan Empire.
Staring into the face of the man he had condemned to death. Perhaps he hoped that the emperor would have some understanding of the situation that had forced his hand.
U.S.'s devastating mistranslation.
The U.S. had a choice: an invasion of Japan requiring 1 million troops or a top-secret weapon. The Japanese were given an ultimatum: surrender or suffer dire consequences.
In 1945, U.S. President Harry S. Truman, UK Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and Chairman of China Chiang Kai-shek issued the Potsdam Declaration to request Japan's surrender from World War II. If the country didn't, they would experience, quote, prompt and utter destruction. After discussion, Japanese officials released a statement with the phrase makusatsu, which is made from the words for silent and killing. The U.S. took this as officials rejecting or ignoring the request. They proceeded to deploy atomic explosives in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, obliterating infrastructure and taking the lives of tens of thousands.
When we came back after the surrender, we came back to the same area, and the whole city was completely flat. It was really devastating to see.
Japan soon surrendered. Researchers later found that mokusatsu could have an alternate meaning. It could have also meant to withhold comment while they contemplated the declaration.
Truman claimed he never lost a night of sleep over his decision, and to this day the United States has never apologized for it. Still, the horror of Hiroshima and Nagasaki firmly cemented atomic bombs as the world's weapons of absolute last resort.
Hitler's invasion of Russia.
Hitler's decision to invade the Soviet Union was his greatest gamble of the Second World War.
In 1939, Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact with Germany, with plans for the two nations to divide Eastern Europe between them. However, with competing political ideologies, the relationship rapidly changed as Germany began running rampant across Europe. In 1941, Hitler issued Operation Barbarossa, an invasion of Russia, tearing up their pact.
Despite facing a Red Army with almost 3 million men on its western border, Hitler is confident of victory.
However, it didn't go to plan when they faced a massive army, harsh weather, and brutal tactics. Losses on both sides mounted into the millions. Germany had spread itself too thin by facing massive battles on two fronts. The lack of progress caused former Axis nations to defect to the Allies, as Germany lost momentum and eventually the war. What other influential political mistakes did we miss from the video?
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
Okay, get ready, because our next video is going to highlight unintended losses that set off history-altering chain reactions.
Genghis Khan died without having achieved what he believed was his destiny, to conquer the entire world.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we'll be looking at completely unexpected deaths that had enormous consequences for the future of humanity. We'll be excluding people who were murdered or who died after the events they were responsible for.
And after his death, that legend became an inspiration to many who dreamed, but ultimately failed to follow where he had led.
Menes. Menes is the oldest entry on our list, an Egyptian pharaoh who ruled around 5,000 years ago. He's credited as being the founder of the first dynasty and the first unifier of Upper and Lower Egypt. After dying, his model of a unified nation under one single ruler became a blueprint for civilizations across the globe. We don't know for certain how he died. However, some legends say that he was snatched and killed by a hippopotamus. Egypt would reach the height of its power under Ramesses II, who died in 1213 BCE, triggering the Intermediate Period, which brought a massive decline in Egypt. Mansa Musa. The 9th Mansa of Mali Empire was the richest person to ever exist, and has remained that way since the 14th century. He was so rich, he handed out gold to everyone he met while traveling, causing mass inflation and almost destroying the economy in Cairo. Some estimate that his pilgrimage to the Middle East caused $1.5 billion of economic losses. His death was probably due to natural causes, but we can't say for certain. After his death, his successors lacked his skill, and the Mali Empire entered a period of decline from which it would never recover. Charles the Bold. Charles the Bold was the last Duke of Burgundy and lived in the 15th century. In his later years, he was attempting to unify the Low Countries, a feat never before accomplished in history. This ambition caused the Burgundian Wars, and at the Battle of Nancy, Charles faced the Duke of Lorraine's forces on the battlefield. This battle was a disaster and resulted in the death of Charles. With no male heir, Burgundy was disintegrated and the land was divided between France and Austria. If Charles had survived, then he may have unified the Low Countries a century earlier than they actually did. King Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun is one of the most famous pharaohs of Egypt, but had little historical impact during his life. We often call him the Boy King, since he died due to natural causes when he was about 19 years old, after only a 9-year reign.
People romantically call Tutankhamun the Boy King, and that's because he came to the throne when he was 9.5. But he died when he was about 19, and by the age of 14 in ancient Egypt you were a man. So really, it's more of a romantic myth.
He died in 1323 BCE, but he only became impactful in 1922, when his tomb was discovered by Howard Carter. It was the most intact pharaonic tomb ever found, which was a monumental discovery and completely reshaped archaeology.
Tutankhamun's treasures captivated the world. In the months and years following their discovery, they were painstakingly excavated and transferred to the Cairo Museum.
His golden funerary mask is now on display in the Egyptian Museum of Cairo and is one of the most iconic artifacts in all of history. Henry II of France. Not only did Henry II die in a famously tragic and unusual manner, but his death also had major political repercussions for the European balance of power. During a jousting tournament in 1559, his opponent's lance shattered on impact with the king, and a splinter penetrated Henry's eye. It then entered his brain, became infected, and killed him 10 days later. His 15-year-old son then took charge, but he was not a capable ruler. Not long after, the French Wars of Religion in 1562 would begin, and it wouldn't end until 1598. If it wasn't for his untimely death, this tumultuous period might have been avoided entirely. Alexander the Great. Alexander created one of the largest empires ever seen in an incredibly small time frame. He died in 323 BCE at the age of 32 in Babylon.
He contracted a fever, possibly malaria, and on the 10th of June, 323 BC, after a night of heavy drinking, Alexander died. He was a month short of his 33rd birthday.
We don't know exactly what killed him, but it was certainly natural causes. This death initiated a series of events that shaped the world for centuries to come. Alexander did little to consolidate his empire and didn't come up with a plan for what would happen to it after he died. His realm ended up divided into separate kingdoms led by his generals, which resulted in a series of wars and conflicts over the territories.
His conquests had opened the East to a flood of Western and Greek influence, and the contact between cultures was to have a lasting effect on European and Asian civilization.
If not for his early death, his realm could have endured longer and maybe even stopped the rise of Rome. Marie Curie. Marie Curie was a pioneering scientist who completed groundbreaking research on radioactivity. Her contributions to science were significant, but she eventually died in 1934 due to aplastic anemia. This is a condition linked to prolonged exposure to radiation, something we were completely oblivious to during her lifetime. Her passing raised massive amounts of awareness of the dangers associated with radiation exposure and led to improved safety regarding radioactive materials. Her death was tragic and was caused by the discovery that made her successful. Despite her untimely death, she was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize and the only person to win Nobel Prizes in 2 scientific fields. Her legacy will endure forever and continues to inspire generations to advance the field of science. Kublai Khan. Grandson of Genghis, Kublai Khan was maybe the most successful Mongol emperor. He died due to illness in 1294 after ruling for 34 years. In his lifetime, he formed the Yuan dynasty in China, which would last until 1368. He ruled the Mongol Empire while it was at its greatest extent, but unfortunately, his death would be its downfall. After dying, a succession crisis began, and the empire split into 4 separate states. It had already begun to fragment after the death of Mansa Khan in 1259, but Kublai's death was the final nail in the coffin, marking the end of the Mongol dominance in Asia. Genghis Khan. Genghis died in 1227, which was a turning point in history, marking the transition from a unified Mongol empire into a series of powerful khanates.
His empire was now 4 times the size of Alexander the Great's and twice the size of the Roman Empire. But even this was not enough to satisfy the desire of Genghis Khan.
In the winter of 1226, Genghis fell from his horse, which caused him to become seriously ill. We don't know exactly what killed him, but whatever it was, no one intended it to get him. Following his death, the empire's succession would cause significant power struggles in the 13th century. During his life, he was considered a brutal conqueror. However, over time, his legacy evolved, and we now believe Mongol contributions to culture, trade, and governance to have been significant.
Above all, Genghis Khan wanted to leave a lasting legacy. It was not only the sword he wished to be remembered by.
None of this would have happened were it not for Genghis Khan. Vladimir Lenin. Lenin was a revolutionary leader, famous for fighting for democracy in Russia, and then immediately becoming a dictator after losing the first election.
From out of nowhere, Vladimir Lenin had become the leader of the largest nation on earth and was now imposing his will.
He created the Soviet Union, a communist state which would exist until 1991. He died in 1924 due to numerous strokes. His death triggered a power struggle that led to the rise of Joseph Stalin, one of the most brutal men in all of history. Stalin's death was also fascinating and was turned into a black comedy in recent years, The Death of Stalin.
He's irreplaceable. How can we possibly?
Both of these men's deaths changed history, but Lenin's passing would send Russia into decades of turmoil and poverty. Were there any other impactful and woefully unintentional deaths we missed?
Okay, as we're about to see, television isn't just for entertainment. It has the ability to, you guessed it, change history forever.
The Eagle has landed.
We're home. Man on the moon. Boy.
Okay, we're gonna be busy for a minute.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for those television firsts that had a long-lasting effect on the world.
I know that we will succeed, and I pledge to you that we will not let the American public down.
Number 12, television pregnancies and births.
Honey, no.
Yes.
Really? Why didn't you tell me?
Why, you didn't give me a chance.
Are you kidding?
No.
It's me!
Although a rather obscure show titled Mary Kay and Johnny trailblazed the idea of married couples sharing beds and expecting kids on TV, it was I Love Lucy that really captured the public's attention. This was due largely to the expert comic timing of not only Lucille Ball, but of the entire cast.
Ricky, this is it.
This is it. Let's go!
The second season episode, Lucy Goes to the Hospital, makes the entire affair a comedy of errors. But it's also important to note that the network worried about how the pregnancy would go down with an audience.
She's gonna have a baby.
Yes, I sensed that. Will you please take Mrs. Ricardo to room 354?
Oh, you will have to say goodbye to your wife down here. You're not allowed upstairs.
It was a different time, after all, but it's still remarkable to analyze how television firsts fall in line with expanding social mores. Number 11, reality TV revolution. It wasn't specifically referred to as reality television back then, but shows like Candid Camera and the first televised Miss America pageant helped blur the lines between televised fantasy and everyday life.
This is our special for today. You know what it's called?
I give.
It's called the Candid Camera Special.
It's called the what?
The Candid Camera Special. We only give it to people who are on television.
These programs helped lay the groundwork for television audiences to eventually accept the reality TV blueprint we all know so well today.
I left Michigan in search of a painting career here in New York, and I started working with a partner. Now we have a company called Gouda, named after our dog.
I'm with a major rap group now. I went on tour, I went to Arsenio, I just did everything right in the beginning. But now, starting back from my own, I have to start all over again. So that's about it.
These schematics were largely drawn up by the MTV generation, thanks to hits like The Real World and Road Rules, while CBS absolutely changed the game with Survivor back in 2000. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Life is hell, but I'm swell. Bye-bye, blues.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Number 10, television gets some color. The first color television sets and broadcasts occurred during the early 1950s, but were actually unsuccessful, at first anyway, at winning over audiences.
The following program is brought to you in living color on NBC.
The variety show Premiere aired in certain CBS markets in 1951, while commercially produced sets for home use were manufactured 3 years later.
CBS presents this program in color.
Meanwhile, it would be Disney's anthology program Wonderful World of Color that helped ease the public's acceptance of this newfangled technology. We as humans are sometimes fearful of change, just as the radio industry was wary of television's growing influence. The advent of color proved beyond any doubt that TV was here to stay.
No, Doctor. There's nothing wrong with me.
That's what they all say.
Number 9. Star Trek's interracial kiss. The 1960s were a period of great social upheaval, and this sentiment of change was reflected on the small screen. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood helped break down barriers of discrimination with an episode that showcased its host sharing a small wade pool with an African-American police officer.
So, to have me playing a police officer, I was tremendously hesitant. But there was something reluctant about Fred to let go. And I said, Mr. Rogers, I would be very happy to be on your program.
Meanwhile, Star Trek helped push things further from a romantic perspective with regards to the iconic lip lock between stars Nichelle Nichols and William Shatner.
I'm so frightened, Captain. I'm so very frightened.
That's the way they want you to feel. Makes them think that they're alive.
I know it. But I wish I could stop trembling.
Try not to think of them.
Nichols claimed in her 1994 autobiography that she and co-star William Shatner intentionally flubbed lines during shooting. This was so that the more explicit take, not one edited and obscured in camera, would be used for the final product.
But I'm not afraid. I am not afraid.
Number 8. The Beatles and Elvis on The Ed Sullivan Show. The list of iconic performances from The Ed Sullivan Show is long, particularly when it comes to the early days of rock music.
Oh, please, say to me, you let me be your man. And please, say to me, you let me hold your hand.
This was despite the host's initial reticence to book such shaggy long hairs on his program. Still, entire generations of fans were able to remember where they were back when the Beatles and Elvis Presley performed for Ed Sullivan.
I'd like to thank all the millions of wonderful people that are watching in tonight, friends. And I'd like to say this, until we meet you again, may God bless you as He's blessed me. Thank you very much.
The variety show featured exciting live music on a weekly basis, broadcasting electricity through the airwaves. Meanwhile, the boundary-pushing sexuality of this new thing called rock and roll was deemed dangerous by some critics, a force for moral decay and degradation. But fans loved it and returned to The Ed Sullivan Show for many years to come.
And I love become a funeral pyre. Come on, baby, light my fire.
Number 7. The first scripted finale. The Fugitive television series only ran for a few years back in the early 60s, a time when small-screen stories were primarily episodic. However, the compelling mystery at the heart of The Fugitive meant that fans at home greatly desired closure to their story.
Of course, possible she could have called somebody. She could have. Helen had the phone company keep track of all our toll calls for tax reasons. If she called anyone, there might just be a record.
Nearly 80 million people watched the finale, hoping to see Dr. Kimball clear his name, find the mysterious one-armed man, and uncover the truth behind his wife's murder.
This is Dr. Richard Kimball. See, Miss Carlyle told me once that she wouldn't know Dr. Kimball if she saw him. Lucky you arrived when you did. Dr. Kimball and I have to be leaving shortly.
This was a huge deal that almost didn't even happen. Showrunner Leonard Goldberg apparently heard that network executives felt, quote, surprised at the time that viewers at home actually cared about these characters enough to warrant a finale.
Dr. Kimball, how do you feel now that you're a free man?
How do you think he feels?
What are your immediate plans, Doctor?
Well, I'd see some of my family and go back to work, I guess.
Well, what's the first thing you plan to do?
Get out of here.
Number 6. MTV begins. The MTV network is still around today, and much of its programming retains that youth focus which defined its earliest years. It's difficult for those who weren't there to describe how sharply MTV eventually focused upon its impressionable audience.
In my mind and in my car, we can't rewind, we've gone too far.
The era of the music video was officially upon us, and it was now up to the music industry to keep up with demand. Soon, style mattered just as much, if not more, than substance, and a new crop of MTV-friendly groups like Duran Duran and Madonna made the most out of the medium. MTV also led the pack with its original programming, from Headbangers Ball and 120 Minutes to its original news and entertainment. Said simply, we wanted our MTV. Number 5. Vietnam War coverage. It was the conflict that aired nightly into American homes, bringing all of the controversy and violence to the dinner table.
What the hell does that do to a 19-year-old kid?
A 19-year-old kid shouldn't have been here.
The Vietnam War saw a then unmatched number of accredited journalists and combat photographers alike on the ground, capturing daily details about what was going on abroad. This television coverage added more fuel to the fire of protest and discourse in the United States, echoing the civil unrest and arguments surrounding the validity of Vietnam.
That the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could.
Additionally, the war coverage showcased a shocking amount of footage that would have probably been deemed too gruesome to be included in a fictional TV program. Yet there it was for all to see, hear, and digest, for better or worse.
I don't think our broadcast had a principal effect on that, but I think it was a straw on the back of a lot of indications that he was unhappy with the progress of the war and thought he himself ought to get out.
Number 4. Apollo 11, the moon landing.
It does seem appropriate that as man is about to set foot on the moon for the first time in the history of mankind, that we should honor this event and celebrate it with music.
The cynicism of the 1970s hadn't yet set in back in July of 1969. This was when the Apollo 11 space shuttle mission took off into the stars, landing on the surface of the moon on the 20th of that month. The major television networks, for their part, leaned heavily into the event, with each planning special programming to coincide with the landing.
Armstrong is on the moon. Neil Armstrong, 38-year-old American, standing on the surface of the moon.
The eyes of just about every American were glued to their television sets at this time. They were greeted by everything from Duke Ellington's big band jazz to science fiction legends Rod Serling and Isaac Asimov.
I'm very much honored indeed to be invited here today to help celebrate this great occasion. Matter of fact, I'm so inspired that I think I shall attempt to make my debut as a vocalist with Moon Maiden. How about that?
It was a giant leap for television kind that felt almost as big as Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong.
I wonder just what there is to add to that.
Number 3, 24-hour news.
This news service will be called the Cable News Network and will program continually updated half-hour segments of national news, business news, sports, and features 24 hours a day.
Information is a click away for all of us today, and this availability didn't occur in a vacuum. Ted Turner's cable news network changed the game back in 1980 when it kickstarted the era of a 24-hour news cycle. No longer did people need to wait for their morning paper to read the headlines. Instead, these headlines were broadcast almost as quickly as they occurred, thanks to the efforts of on-call news professionals getting the scoop.
And to feed from various points where stories are breaking in the world and bring the material right here into Atlanta, where we'll put it on the air as fast as we can. I think we're going to get a lot more international news on the air. I think we're going to get it on a lot faster. You're going to get the opportunity to see a lot more of the way things take place in the world on CNN.
It wasn't an easy road at first. Slow news days do exist after all, and one could argue that 24-hour news also paved the way for TV tabloids and shock programs. However, for news addicts with FOMO for the info, CNN was a godsend.
The net is made up of some 12,000 individual computer networks. Internet began back in 1969. It was a tool of the Pentagon. But nowadays, just about anyone with a computer and a modem can join in, usually for a nominal fee.
Number 2, we now break for a commercial.
Hello, Mary. Why, what's the matter?
Nothing. I'm just sitting here waiting for my mother.
How about a bottle of Coca-Cola?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Tompkins.
Hey, remember when you didn't have to sit through commercials at the movies? Or during your streaming services? Or at the gas station? Yeah, we do too. Which is why we sort of envy those who lived in an era prior to these intrusive attempts on our wallets. The very first paid television commercial was ordered by the Bulova Watch Company, which booked airtime during a July 1st, 1941 baseball game.
America runs on Bulova time.
The ad only aired in the New York market, as the Brooklyn Dodgers took on the Philadelphia Phillies. However, the genie was out of the bottle, and soon, companies everywhere expanded their advertising budgets to include television alongside radio and printed media.
Yes, stay on the beam with energy-packed Sunbeam bread. All day long, eat Sunbeam bread and renew energy as you burn it up. Eat delicious Sunbeam bread.
Number 1, the World's Fair.
I walked my feet off taking pictures. I remember going through the Court of Nations where they had huge statues in front of each nation's building.
Supposedly, those who were at the dawn of cinema were legitimately frightened by a famous shot from 1903's The Great Train Robbery. The scene showcased actor Justice D. Barnes firing his gun down the camera lens in full close-up. We suspect that similar trepidation was also paid to the dawn of television way back at the 1939 World's Fair. It was here that RCA debuted their televisions to the public, after initially giving out advertising brochures to sales professionals.
There's no question that the fair got people to think positively, and the future would be better. And that was the whole purpose. It was to stimulate this get out of the doldrums and get out of the depression mentality. But it was an opportunity to see what the future would look like.
This World's Fair was also televised and gave rise to NBC ordering regularly scheduled programming. Visitors could see firsthand how this new medium worked. Ground floor participants to the television revolution.
My first look at television was in the '39 fair. They had an exhibit set up where they would photograph the people outside and then electronically show the picture inside.
What's your most nostalgic television memory?
What was the big deal about television? I think on that note I was wrong.
Technology was way ahead of the rest of us, and the promises that were made that in the future all automobiles will fly upside down at 40,000 feet.
Ford was there, General Motors was there.
You saw the roads of tomorrow. I went on the parachute jump, and the parachute, it went up, 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 and you hit the top, and a big parachute opened, and you floated down.
These are things that we had never seen before, never imagined.
Even a superpower like the United States of America is not immune to costly mistakes. So here now are all the mistakes America made that changed the world.
It took about 45 seconds from the time the bomb left the airplane until it exploded.
Welcome to Watch Mojo. And today we're breaking down the actions that unintentionally set the wheels of American history into motion.
Eisenhower finally came to the view, reluctantly, that Castro was an adversary and a danger.
Prohibition.
The audacity of the Prohibition movement was that they believed that by the application of reason, morality, and religion, that you could change the habits of millions of Americans, that you could close down legal industries that brought in millions of dollars of revenue.
Looking back on it now, it's impossible to comprehend how the U.S. government thought that a ban on alcohol would be met with no resistance. The 18th Amendment, ratified in January 1919, was proposed as a way to cure societal ills and somehow stimulate the economy. The amendment thus outlawed the production, transport, and sale of intoxicating liquors such as wine and beer.
It could start with simple moral suasion, and of course that was very effective. But also they had newspapers, they had illustrations. They have many, many forms of reaching the public. They had handbills, they had posters. They had cartoonists who worked exclusively for prohibitionists.
Almost immediately, an alcohol black market was established, and those willing to bootleg the stuff not only profited, but essentially became folk heroes in the process. Eventually, in 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt made good on his promise to end prohibition and restore the desperately needed tax dollars from alcohol sales as a means of combating the Great Depression.
Prohibition claimed that it would alter America in such ways that all sorts of reforms and social benefits would accrue, and they didn't.
Prohibition proved that you can't legislate morality. It is the only amendment to the U.S. Constitution that tried to control people's behavior and tell them you can't do this.
Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo.
At this time, it was necessary for the Mexicans to negotiate because they were afraid of losing all of their territory, or even more territory than that already occupied in the north.
The relatively short-lived Mexican-American War belied its length to generate important ripple effects over U.S. history. The war stemmed from tensions over the 1845 American annexation of Texas and President James K. Polk's failed attempts to buy the desired territory. The 1848 signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo saw Mexico ceding California, Nevada, Utah, and more to the United States, for which Mexico was paid $15 million.
When the war between Mexico and the United States was over, it left a profound frustration among the Mexican people, because common people, everyday citizens, had seen their neighbors, their brothers, and ordinary soldiers die in a war that, for all the bloodshed, had resulted in the loss of half of Mexico's territory.
While this all sounds diplomatic enough, unforeseen consequences most prominently included political infighting over whether the new territory would be slave states or free states. These debates contributed to the growing tensions between the American North and South and played a major role in the onset of the American Civil War.
There were others who shared Grant's opinion that the United States had been at fault.
And if not at fault, that it did not fully live up to its ideology as expressed in the noblest of the American writings on democracy and freedom.
The Great Depression.
It was produced, the Great Depression was produced by a failure of government, by a failure of monetary policy. It was produced by a failure of the Federal Reserve System to act in accordance with the intentions of those who established it.
The tragedy of World War I was quickly offset by the indulgence of the Roaring Twenties. During this prosperous period, the United States became the world's richest country. Its wartime economy was bolstered by victorious soldiers rejoining the workforce and a consumer goods boom, among other factors. Of course, as the old saying goes, all good things must come to an end.
The facts were that from 1929 to 1933, the total quantity of money in the United States, the amount of currency, the amount of bank deposits, what Mr. Eccles referred to as M2, that total amount of money declined by 1/3.
While the Depression's exact causes are still hotly debated by historians and economists, the 1963 book, A Monetary History of the United States, argues that the Federal Reserve's iron grip on the money supply and subsequent refusal to lend brought the Roaring Twenties to a screeching halt. There just simply wasn't enough money to go around.
And why did the quantity of money decline? It declined because the Federal Reserve System failed to prevent the decline. The Federal Reserve System could have prevented the decline at all times. There never was a moment during that period when the Federal Reserve did not have the power to prevent the decline in the quantity of money.
My Lai Massacre.
A South Vietnamese official, the military chief of Quang Ngai province, today denied charges that American soldiers on the ground executed several hundred villagers in March of 1968. The province chief said the civilians died in air and artillery strikes that leveled the village after a number of Americans had been killed there by Viet Cong snipers.
It probably goes without saying that the Vietnam War remains one of the most historically unpopular war efforts of all time. Beginning as a Cold War proxy between Soviet-supported North Vietnam and the American-supported South, the U.S. put soldiers' boots on the ground from 1965 until a humiliating 1973 withdrawal.
The villagers' version of the incident was given by survivors yesterday. They said a patrol of 100 Americans stormed into the hamlet, drove all the residents out of their huts, then opened fire with automatic weapons. 2 American soldiers, one an officer, the other an enlisted man, are being held in this country in connection with the case, but neither has been brought to trial.
In those 8 years, it's inarguable that the U.S.'s most shameful moment was the March 1968 My Lai massacre, in which American forces brutally murdered as many as 504 civilians, mostly women, children, and the elderly. Despite an attempted cover-up by the U.S. Army, news of the senseless killings reached the public in November 1969, resulting in massive backlash against U.S. involvement in Vietnam.
I wanted to see action taken. I wanted to see the people who are responsible arrested. I think that the people who are primarily responsible have not been arrested. I think the people who are being arrested now are merely the pawns of the game. They're the people who, unfortunately, lack the presence of mind to refuse to execute this order.
George Washington's crossing of the Delaware River.
The key is absolute secrecy. We do not really have enough men for the task, but we have no choice. Coordinate with Griffin and attack on as many of their posts as possible. The more confusion we can spread, the better.
Some of the entries in our video today have been revealed as mistakes in a historical context. However, in the case of the Founding Fathers' surprise military operation, the attack was only possible because of a Hessian mistake. Hessians were German soldiers who worked on behalf of the British Army, and Johann Rall was a colonel stationed in Trenton, New Jersey.
We don't need trenches or fortifications. The rebel soldiers, those country clowns, they're almost naked, dying of cold, have no provisions, no blankets. Let them come. We shall welcome them with our bayonets.
The overconfident Rall failed to heed the word of a British spy who had foreknowledge of Washington's planned attack, dismissing the Americans' wartime capabilities. Ultimately, Washington's troops emerged victorious in the Battle of Trenton, and Rall soon died of injuries sustained during the fight.
Well, in military terms, it isn't a big deal. You lost 1,000 Germans, but you can always go hire another 1,000 Germans. But it's extremely important on the American side. As the news spreads to all the colonies, there is a feeling that it may indeed be possible to reverse the course of this war.
Trail of Tears.
The promises of the United States government were that if the Cherokees, the Creeks, the Choctaws, the Seminoles, the Chickasaws could somehow assimilate ways of living that were more like their white neighbors, that they could be the political and social equal.
Whether you categorize the forced displacement of the quote-unquote 5 civilized tribes as Native American genocide or an example of ethnic cleansing, it's impossible to deny that the Trail of Tears stands as one of the United States' most shameful chapters. Taking place over the course of 2 decades in the first half of the 19th century, the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Muskogee, and Seminole nations were systematically removed from their ancestral homelands in favor of government-approved Indian territory. Passed as a result of the Indian Removal Act of 1830, approved by President Andrew Jackson, the displacement saw 60,000 people uprooted, with as many as nearly 17,000 dying of disease and starvation along the way.
The state of Georgia basically said to its citizens, this land is yours. They divided up with a land lottery and basically told their people to have at it.
Bay of Pigs invasion.
There is a limit to what the United States in self-respect can endure. That limit has now been reached.
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear
that this government will not hesitate in meeting its primary obligations, which are to the security of our nation.
A defining moment of John F. Kennedy's all-too-short presidency. This now legendary blunder set the stage for relations between Cuba, the U.S., and the future Russia for decades to come. Following the Cuban Revolution, as led by the revolutionary Fidel Castro, the Bay of Pigs invasion was an effort by the U.S. government to remove Castro from power, as well as his socialist government.
The invaders had to hold a small piece of territory for a couple of days. Then the United States would recognize them as the new provisional democratic government of Cuba. This new government of Cuba would immediately call upon the President of the United States to give them military support. The President would authorize the military support. I would assume naval, air, and land forces, and you would have a U.S. invasion of Cuba.
Castro marks the second anniversary of his revolution with the biggest military parade ever staged in Cuba.
Once the invasion was discovered by the greater international community, the faltering military operation was swiftly defeated by the Cuban Revolutionary Armed Forces. The painfully public fallout from the Bay of Pigs incident predictably soured relations between the U.S. and Cuba and drove the latter into the arms of the Soviet Union.
The Cubans were desperate to find some way to get the Soviet Union to guarantee their survival and their independence. Accepting Soviet missiles, for them, seemed like a guarantee.
I call upon Chairman Khrushchev to halt and eliminate this clandestine, reckless, and provocative threat to world peace.
Watergate scandal.
I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
Richard Nixon openly aspired to the presidency for years after serving as vice president, even weighing early retirement following humiliating losses in the 1960 U.S. presidential election and 1962 California gubernatorial election. However, his second term in office was cut short in 1974 following the explosive revelations of the damaging Watergate scandal.
The Democratic National Committee is trying to solve a spy mystery. It began before dawn Saturday when 5 intruders were captured by police inside the offices of the committee in Washington. The 5 men carried cameras and apparently had planted electronic bugs. One of them had several crisp new $100 bills in his pocket. The police said they were thoroughly professional. The suspects are saying nothing. The Democrats say they have no idea who would want to spy on them.
Mr. Nixon says emphatically that the White House is in no way involved in the burglary and bugging of the Democratic headquarters, and he'll have no further comment on that matter.
The work of Washington Post journalists Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward determined that Nixon had authorized the planting of illegal wiretaps at the Democratic National Committee headquarters in Washington, D.C. The unveiling of the vast conspiracy led Nixon to become the only U.S. president to resign from his post.
I have never been a quitter. To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body. But as president, I must put the interests of America first. America needs a full-time president and a full-time Congress, particularly at this time with problems we face at home and abroad. To continue to fight through the months ahead for my personal vindication would almost totally absorb the time and attention of both the President and the Congress in a period when our entire focus should be on the great issues of peace abroad and prosperity without inflation at home.
Ignoring Pearl Harbor warning signs.
On December 7, 1941, Japan, like its infamous Axis partners, struck first and declared war afterwards. Costly to our Navy was the loss of war vessels, airplanes, and equipment, but more costly to Japan was the effectiveness of its foul attack in immediately unifying America in its determination to fight and win the war thrust upon it, and to win the peace that will follow.
While most historians caution against falling too deeply into a Pearl Harbor conspiracy theory rabbit hole, there is evidence to suggest that the U.S. government could have taken possible threats more seriously. Yugoslavian businessman Duško Popov worked as a double agent for the XX Committee of MI5 and for the German Abwehr. The latter sent Popov on an American work trip with a questionnaire about Hawaiian military facilities, with specific questions about Pearl Harbor.
It just so happens the Germans were doing a little bit of work for the Japanese. The Japanese had asked the Germans to collect some data. And the Americans had the equipment to actually magnify the microdot and to read the questionnaire. And wouldn't you know, the questionnaire included questions about Pearl Harbor.
Tokyo wanted to know about the water depth at Pearl Harbor and whether or not anti-airdrop torpedo nets were in place.
FBI head J. Edgar Hoover dismissed Popov's claims, and it should be noted that the questions did not specifically allude to the possibility of such an air attack. However, it seems fair to say that Hoover could have taken Popov's warnings more seriously.
First to feel the sting of Japanese steel are the USS Oklahoma and Utah, the latter a 33-year-old target ship. Accurate hits by the enemy bombers make short work of these two naval bulwarks. Now, with their keels practically out of water, they lie helpless wrecks and a sad reminder of cowardly strategy. To make possible a surprise attack within Pearl Harbor, the Japs built two-man submarines to enable them to fire sneak blows within waters that are narrow and tortuous.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
I instantly recognized it as an American plane, as no Japanese aircraft could fly at that altitude at the time. It was just one plane, so I assumed that it was passing by as usual.
Like perhaps no other moment in American history, the August 1945 atomic bombings of the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki forced the world to stand back in stunned silence and take notice. The only ever usage of nuclear weapons in combat, the strikes almost immediately resulted in Japanese surrender and ended World War II in just under a month. Altogether, up to nearly 250,000 were killed, almost all of them civilians, from radiation poisoning and other effects brought on by the detonations. While some have declared that the bombings were necessary to end the war, detractors have argued that the war was already on track for an Allied victory, and that they were overkill.
I think when you play a meaningful part in bringing about the death of over 100,000 people and the injury of a comparable number, you naturally don't think of that as with ease. I believe we had a great cause to do this, but I do not think that our consciences should be entirely easy at stepping out of the part of studying nature, learning the truth about it, to change the course of human history.
Are there any historical blunders we missed?
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
Certain breakthroughs can redefine science, society, and civilization itself. So here now are the biggest history-changing discoveries.
So a wormhole bends space like this, so you can take a shortcut through a higher dimension.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 discoveries that changed history.
A DNA strand like me is a blueprint for building a living thing.
My beak is different, see? It evolved a slightly bigger hook over the generations to help me eat the cactus on this part of the island.
You gotta locate the closest medical research facility, a CDC, a WHO, something that makes vaccine.
For this list, we're ranking concepts, theories, objects, and anything that altered life as we know it after being discovered. We won't be tackling inventions, because they deserve a list of their own. Number 10, quantum theory.
Isolated completely, a quantum system would revert back to separate states of matter, each entangled with a distinct state of its environment.
In the 20th century, quantum theory came along and blew up everything we thought we knew about matter. That is, everything that physically exists in the universe. A century after the true discovery of atoms, we finally started to decipher them. Atoms are made up of subatomic particles, protons, neutrons, and electrons, while light itself is made up of photons. Quantum mechanics explains how all matter at the smallest level interacts with itself and with light. Without quantum theory, we wouldn't understand electromagnetism, radiation, or atomic structure, meaning that neither modern physics nor chemistry could exist.
It's quantum entanglement between the quantum states of Posner molecules in your brains.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
It was pioneered by major physicists like Max Planck and Niels Bohr, and is one of science's most important disciplines.
Do you guys just put the word quantum in front of everything?
Number 9. X-rays.
So, guess we can skip all this, huh?
Well, we're here. Machines on, may as well take a look.
Abundant in the universe, X-rays are a form of ionizing, high-frequency radiation totally invisible to the human eye. They were first discovered by Wilhelm Röntgen, whose name is still used as a unit of radiation. X-rays rapidly became an indispensable part of modern medicine. The calcium in bones absorbs the X-rays and allows images to be taken of the inside of the body.
Wow.
Wow what? What is wow? What is that?
That's, yep.
This allows us to study all kinds of afflictions we previously had to guess about. At the same time, radiation and radioactivity were being studied by scientists from Henri Becquerel to Marie and Pierre Curie. Marie Curie ultimately received a Nobel Prize for her work in the field of X-rays. Number 8. Dinosaurs. For a long time, what existed on Earth before us was a mystery. Then, in the 1800s, paleontology was invented as a discipline after the first almost complete fossil of an Archaeopteryx was discovered. It wasn't the first dinosaur bone ever found. However, this discovery of a fossil meant people had the most substantial link to the widespread existence of dinosaurs. Humanity had uncovered the remains of an entire ecosystem that died out millions of years ago. Now, dinosaurs are a fixture in every natural history museum in the world. They've also been the subject of a few popular movies you may have heard of.
Stand down. Hey! What did I just say?
And who doesn't have a favourite dinosaur? Number 7. The Big Bang Theory.
Our whole universe was in a hot, dense state that nearly 14 billion years ago expansion started. Wait.
In the 1920s, it was observed by influential physicists Georges Lemaitre and Edwin Hubble that the universe was expanding. They also realised that this expansion was getting faster.
The Earth began to cool, the autotrophs began to drool, Neanderthals developed tools, we built a wall. We built the pyramids.
So, if you go back in time, the universe would theoretically get smaller at a slower rate, and by that logic, our massive universe started as a small and dense singularity ready to get bigger. Scientists theorised that it exploded at some time and gave birth to the universe in an astonishing explosion now nicknamed the Big Bang. It took most of the 20th century for the Big Bang to become the most widely accepted cosmological model of the universe, but it's now one of the most important discoveries in science. Isn't that right, Sheldon?
Math, science, history, unraveling the mystery that all started with a Big Bang. Hey!
Number 6. Electricity. Proof that electricity existed appeared in the magnetic fields across the universe and lightning in the sky for millennia. But it took a long time for humans to work out how to harness the natural power of electricity.
Perfectly safe.
When we did, it created a technological revolution like no other. While founding father Benjamin Franklin conducted many experiments to study lightning, the true father of electricity is Michael Faraday. This scientist built on centuries of research to invent the electric motor. Faraday's work, in turn, led to revolutions like the light bulb. Decades later, Nikola Tesla would even invent a way to wirelessly transmit electricity.
What's conducting the electricity?
Our bodies, Mr. Angier, are quite capable of conducting and indeed producing energy.
While that discovery was virtually ignored for another 100 years, it was another huge stepping stone in this crucial field. Number 5. Penicillin.
That wasn't so bad. That was penicillin.
You might not think that mold would be the basis for modern antibiotics, but that's exactly where penicillin, the world's first antibiotic, originated. The compound and its medicinal properties were discovered by Alexander Fleming in 1928. He also named it and pioneered the production process. Penicillin is used to fight off a wide range of infections, most often those caused by strep bacteria, like strep throat and strep meningitis.
She needs a massive dose of penicillin or a broad-spectrum antibiotic immediately, or...
Fleming built upon similar developments that were achieved in the previous century by Louis Pasteur. He pioneered germ theory and realized that microbes and bacteria were responsible for causing illness. Thanks to Pasteur, people learned the importance of disinfection to prevent disease.
Hey guys, I found it.
What? How do you know?
Because it says penicillin on the bottom.
Number 4, theory of relativity.
Well, every hour we spend on that planet will be 7 years back on Earth. That's relativity, folks.
In the early 1900s, a young scientist named Albert Einstein realized that Isaac Newton's ideas about gravity were largely wrong. He expressed this discovery through his theories of general and special relativity, which have formed the backbone of modern physics for many decades. Einstein's groundbreaking equations described how gravity is created by massive objects bending space-time around them.
Time is relative, okay? It can stretch and it can squeeze, but it can't run backwards. It just can't. Right? The only thing that can move across dimensions like time is gravity.
He also predicted phenomena like black holes and gravitational waves, which decades later were proven conclusively to exist. It was a revelation on par with the Copernican system that put the sun at the center of the solar system instead of the Earth. Relativity was yet another theory that changed our entire perspective of the universe.
The only thing that can move across dimensions like time is gravity.
Number 3, DNA.
Mr. DNA, where did you come from? From your blood. Just one drop of your blood contains billions of strands of DNA, the building blocks of life. A DNA strand, like me, is a blueprint for building a living thing.
Humans, just like every other organism on Earth, have DNA, but we didn't always know what that was. The team behind the discovery of the double helix was James Watson, Francis Crick, Maurice Wilkins, and the often forgotten Rosalind Franklin. While they weren't the first to think about DNA like this, all of them did invaluable work in the 1950s. Their research eventually led to the human genome being completely sequenced in 2003.
If we looked at screens like these once a second for 8 hours a day, it'd take 2 years to look at the entire DNA strand. It's that long. Since it's so it's full of holes. Now that's where our geneticists take over.
Brilliant minds use this invaluable resource to better understand genes, traits, and diseases caused by DNA. And genetics is still advancing at an unprecedented rate. Most recently, the development of CRISPR, a gene editing tool, could cure genetic conditions and possibly eradicate cancer.
We use the complete DNA of a frog to fill in the holes and complete the code.
Number 2, vaccines.
It has to be viral. There is no plausible alternative. And like any virus, once we find its origin, we can develop a vaccine.
That's Dr. Fassbach, virologist from Harvard.
The analogy I keep coming back to is Spanish flu.
Spanish flu?
It didn't exist in 1918, but by 1920, it killed 3% of the world.
The development of vaccines, particularly modern ones like the polio vaccine, might be considered more of an invention than a discovery. But the very first one made to combat smallpox is a different story.
If we knew where this thing started, then we'd have a chance of developing a vaccine to stop it.
I didn't choose the
So we're sending Dr. Fassbach there to look for the source.
British doctor Edward Jenner observed that milkmaids who had been exposed to the cowpox virus didn't develop smallpox later on in life. Using that knowledge, he used the pus from the cowpox virus itself, with no modifications, to successfully inoculate people against smallpox. This wasn't the first time a similar process had been attempted. However, Jenner's method was one of the most effective and paved the way for the virtual eradication of smallpox in the late 20th century.
The World Health Organization has created a vaccine that works as a kind of camouflage, making people who receive it invisible to the infected.
We bought ourselves some time.
Volunteer forces are delivering the vaccine to areas that have been cordoned off.
distribution efforts began in earnest.
The importance of getting the information out to those still alive.
Number 1. Evolution.
Mutation. It is the key to our evolution. It is how we have evolved from a single-celled organism into the dominant species on the planet. This process is slow, normally taking thousands and thousands of years. But every few hundred millennia, evolution leaps forward.
After some long voyages on the HMS Beagle, Charles Darwin was finally ready to publish his magnum opus, 1859's On the Origin of Species. In this book, he laid out his theory of evolution. It basically states that animals were all related if you go far enough back, and species gain adaptations over time, including humans.
Genetic mutation, the evolution of the human genome.
Evolution shook the world to its core and was interpreted by many religions as indictment of their beliefs. Around 150 years later, evolution is regarded as fact by scientists and a large majority of the public. The theory helped us figure out how humans and animals adapted to even the harshest environments over time. By understanding how living creatures changed in the past, scientists can theorize how they'll evolve in the future.
I saw the next stage in evolution. What Charles and I dreamt of finding.
Okay, for our last video today, we're going to look at human errors that have affected many history books.
300,000 souls live in the city. And they've all just left?
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're looking at the most consequential blunders throughout human history.
The simultaneous collapse of 4 powers is unprecedented.
Kim Jong-Nam goes to Tokyo Disneyland.
Why would the young dictator of North Korea want to kill his own brother? Well, to understand North Korea, you really have to think of it as being an absolute monarchy, the Kim dynasty. The dynasty was founded by Kim Il-sung after the Second World War. When the old man died in 1994, his son, Kim Jong-il, ascended the throne.
Kim Jong-nam was once the heir to the North Korean dictatorship until 2001 when he made an embarrassing attempt to visit Tokyo Disneyland. Traveling on a fake Dominican Republic passport bearing a Chinese name, Kim was arrested upon arrival in Japan and deported to China. The incident deeply embarrassed his father, Kim Jong-il, and caused him to be shunned by his family. Ultimately, his younger half-brother Kim Jong-un took over from their father. In 2017, Kim was assassinated in Malaysia, and it was later revealed that he had been a CIA informant.
Why he killed? You don't know? Because his power is not stable. Last time Kim Jong-il, his father, he never killed people. But now, I don't think so. That's why he killed all the people. He cannot trust the people, right?
He also supported reform and free market policies, which apparently contributed to him being passed over. Had he never attempted that fateful trip, perhaps North Korea's trajectory might have been different.
After Jang Sang-tae executed it, killed it, after that, 1.5 years, only one time. I saw him. I was waiting for him, but he never came. It means his situation completely changed, be dangerous, and then the suffering for the money.
Byzantine refusal to hire Orban.
Praise to all of you, Engineer Urban.
Thank you, my Sultan.
Have a safe journey.
The Roman Empire's final 2 centuries were their most difficult. By 1452, the Ottoman Empire already had its eyes on Constantinople, which prompted Hungarian siege engineer Orban to offer his cannons to the Romans. Unfortunately, they couldn't afford his services or provide the materials needed to construct his weapons. So, Orban took his business to the Ottomans, who happily took him on.
Free from misfortune! Do not fail us in our mission! Let our courageous soldiers be victorious on the battlefield!
He crafted the Basilic, one of the largest cannons in history, requiring 90 oxen and 400 men to transport it. Its cannonballs, each weighing 1,200 pounds, devastated the Theodosian walls, which were impenetrable for about 800 years prior. The Ottoman Sultan also carried warships across the land, bypassing the harbor's Great Chain and giving them another huge advantage.
Somebody hold the rope!
Titanic sinks after iceberg warnings are ignored.
Why are they turning? Is it all over? It is,
Many mistakes were made that caused the Titanic to sink, so it's difficult to pinpoint just one. Perhaps the most consequential, though, was turning hard to starboard when they spotted the iceberg, which extended the collision, creating a large gash that flooded 5 compartments. Had they struck the iceberg head-on, the bow would have been crushed, but only 1 or 2 compartments would have flooded.
Note the time, enter it in the log.
What was that, Mr. Murdoch?
An iceberg, sir. I put her hard to starboard and ran the engines full of stern, but it was too close. I tried to port round it, but she hit.
In such an event, the ship could have survived, as it was built to still float with up to 4 flooded compartments. Also, it only carried 20 lifeboats, enough for about half its passengers. The primary mistake that night was ignoring iceberg warnings and maintaining a high speed throughout. Changing just this one decision could likely have prevented the accident.
The pumps. If we open the doors...
The pumps buy you time, but minutes only. From this moment, no matter what we do, Titanic will founder.
Mexico attacks the Alamo.
If you could oversee manning the walls, it would be a help. We should have 6 men to a cannon, 18 tubes, which works out to...
108 men.
And we should have a man with a musket every 4 feet of wall.
We're gonna need more men.
In 1836, the Texas Revolution was underway, with the Anglo-American residents of Texas fighting for independence from the Mexican Republic. They were successful, winning 10 years of independence before joining the United States in 1846. During the war, Mexican forces under General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna laid siege to the Alamo.
You said you wanted to see him. There he is.
The Napoleon of the West.
Which one? That's Santa Anna.
Yeah.
He's quite the peacock, isn't he?
After 13 days, roughly 1,500 Mexican soldiers launched a decisive attack, overwhelming the garrison of about 200 Texians after 3 attempts. It was a Pyrrhic victory, though, as the merciless bloodshed inspired many to join the army, hoping to take revenge for the loss of their fellow Texians. Mere weeks later, a now fortified Texian army attacked the Mexicans by surprise in the Battle of San Jacinto, decimating them in just 18 minutes.
At this very moment, our soldiers are held in the Alamo against a force of thousands. They put their hopes in Colonel Fannin, who, despite his pedigree, has proven himself ill-equipped to lead, much less march an army. This is from Colonel Travis. I call on you, in the name of liberty, to come to our aid with all dispatch.
Trojans bring in the horse.
What is this? An offering to Poseidon. The Greeks are praying for a safe return home. This is a gift. We should take it to the temple of Poseidon.
I think we should burn it.
Burn it, my prince. It's a gift to the god.
This was a mistake so monumental it became a metaphor for deception that is still widely used today. The ancient city of Troy was first destroyed around 1200 BC, and again by archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann in the 19th century. According to legend, the Greeks built a giant wooden horse, hid soldiers in it, and presented it to the Trojans as a gift.
Helen, we must go. Where? I'll show you. Now, hurry. Paris. It's a long way, quick. We must go now.
Believing it to be a symbol of victory, the Trojans brought it into their city, only for Greek soldiers to emerge and decimate Troy. The tale's authenticity remains heavily debated, with no direct evidence. However, oral history played a central role in the ancient world, which preserved surprisingly truthful elements, suggesting that this tale may have been inspired by real-life events.
Let Troy burn!
Caesar ignores warnings.
Senator Vorenus, I come about your grandson, Lucius. Julia, and what I tell you now is the truth.
Julius Caesar is most famous for sowing the seeds of the Roman Empire, enslaving and slaughtering millions of Gauls, and giving the month of July its name. He was eventually assassinated in 44 BC, which shouldn't have come as a surprise since he was given several warnings about it.
If I may, gracious Caesar, you were going to consider revoking my brother's exile.
I'm still considering it. Take your hand off me.
What are you waiting for? Now! Now! No!
All of these were dismissed, leading to his death in the Senate, where he was stabbed 23 times. A soothsayer warned him to beware the Ides of March, the eventual date he was killed. His wife Calpurnia had a dream of his death and insisted he stay home, but he dismissed her fears. Ultimately, his trusted friend Brutus convinced him to come in, which turned out to be the dictator's final mistake.
So you see, the tyrant is dead, the Republic is restored, and you are alone. Would you like some honey water? I won't. Thank you.
Mao's great leap forward.
I saw Russian cars which the Chinese have begun to make. There were wood-burning buses of the type I had seen in Europe during the war. Vehicles of all kinds. In most places of the city, there was a good traffic control system.
Mao Zedong was the founder of Communist China, who became leader of the CCP during the Long March, a pivotal event in the Second Sino-Japanese War. After Japan's defeat, he sought to industrialize China and finally recover from the century of humiliation. He believed rapid industrialization would help them catch up to the West, but it turned into a catastrophic failure.
Here, oil is extracted from coal. Built in 1928 by the Japanese, destroyed during the war, it was restored and enlarged. The Japanese produced 225,000 tons of petroleum in their best year. 1957 production was 320,000 tons. 1958 goal, 440,000 to catch up with Britain.
The plan was overly optimistic and resulted in mass famine and an economic collapse. By 1962, Mao faced criticism for his policies and was sidelined at the 7,000 Cadres Conference. This didn't last long, though, as just 4 years later, he kickstarted the Cultural Revolution, which allowed him to reclaim full control of the nation.
Coal comes from the Fushun mines. The plant also has its own department store, canteen, and club. Built during the Japanese occupation, the plant has been restored and enlarged following wartime destruction. All kinds of steel products are made. They have 10 open hearth furnaces. It takes about 8.5 hours to run a batch through during the leap forward, an improvement over earlier production figures.
NASA ignores Challenger warnings.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
All the communications between the shuttle and mission control indicated everything was going fine. There was a sense of relief that the much-delayed flight was finally underway.
In 1986, NASA launched the shuttle Challenger, which tragically exploded only 73 seconds after liftoff. The event occurred during a cold morning, which caused the ship's rubber O-rings to stiffen, leading to a fuel leak that ignited the vessel. All 7 crew members perished, marking one of the darkest moments in the history of space exploration.
Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs. Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
Roger, go at throttle up.
Months earlier, several engineers, including Roger Beaujolais, had warned of an impending failure due to the O-ring's vulnerability to cold. Beaujolais even wrote a memo outlining this issue, but his concerns were completely ignored. Although a team was formed to address the problem, they lacked adequate support, and the launch proceeded, only to end disastrously, like Beaujolais predicted. America escalating tensions in Vietnam.
It was a serious mistake for Kennedy to get involved, as he did, with American force in that part of the world, thinking that this great monolithic Soviet-style communism would rule the roost, when he could have played it differently, I believe, and fought it more subtly.
The United States entered the Vietnam War following the Gulf of Tonkin incident, where North Vietnamese forces allegedly attacked the U.S. Navy in international waters. The event was framed as an unprovoked attack, but later evidence showed otherwise.
The great word of the Vietnam War gave us was escalation, because it starts off with Kennedy sending in just 400 military advisors who are actually special forces, organizing and controlling the action, and then more go in, and then more go in.
While the first attack remains debated, the second one was entirely fabricated. It devolved into a brutal war, which dragged on for years, causing thousands of American and Vietnamese deaths. Along the way, the United States committed atrocious war crimes, such as the My Lai massacre. Ultimately, the war ended in failure, all spurred on by an incident with very little evidence.
He should have fought it with the limited aid he gave it initially, with the development of the special forces, the Green Berets as they're called, and other small tactical units, and not created this great surge of North Vietnamese resentment.
South Vietnam is already under attack, sometimes by a single assassin, sometimes by a band of guerrillas, recently by full battalions. The peaceful borders of Burma, Cambodia, and India have been repeatedly violated, and the peaceful people of Laos are in danger of losing the independence they gained not so long ago.
Angering Genghis Khan.
You still sing the same song, Temujin.
Many voices carry it now.
Not the Merkits. Outcast.
I asked for this meeting in the hope that Mongol would not shed Mongol blood. Also that you might still join with me to spread the name of the Mongol nation.
Many words can be used to describe Genghis Khan, one of history's most successful conquerors, but cool-headed isn't one of them. In less than 2 years, Genghis annihilated the Khwarezmian Empire. While there were a variety of factors that contributed to this invasion, the main one was an insult to his ambassadors.
I asked for this meeting in the hope that Mongol would not shed Mongol blood. Also that you might still join with me to spread the name of the Mongol nation.
The Merkits are warriors, not a group of women to become part of a herd. We say and do as we want, and we take what we need from anybody.
I promise you this, Jamuda. The Merkits will ride as part of the Mongol nation, or their land will be razed to the ground. Raised so that not even a lame horse would stumble walking across it.
In 1218, the Khan sent a caravan to the empire, who were arrested and executed on suspicion of being spies. When Genghis sent diplomats to deal with the situation, the Khwarezmians refused to comply and beheaded the chief envoy. By 1221, their empire was shattered, and they had suffered somewhere between 2 and 15 million casualties. Maybe think twice before you insult one of history's most ambitious conquerors.
I've lived to see it. That the tribes come together as one people. But it is my sons who will make our nation great. People, their leaders.
Forgetting about time zones hamstrung the Bay of Pigs invasion. During the Cold War, the U.S. backed numerous coups d'etat around the world. While several of these succeeded in installing new regimes, attempts in Cuba failed spectacularly. Worried about Prime Minister Fidel Castro's communist policies, in 1961, the CIA orchestrated the infamous Bay of Pigs invasion, landing Cuban counter-revolutionaries on the country's southwestern coast. However, an obvious paint job on a B-26 bomber, disguised to look Cuban, gave away U.S. involvement to the world, leading President Kennedy to pull back air support. A few days later, a last-ditch bombing raid flying out of Nicaragua was botched when bombers were caught without their escort of fighter jets. Embarrassingly, someone had forgotten the 1-hour difference between Nicaragua and Cuba. Fleming left bacteria out on his bench. Scottish physician Alexander Fleming was a brilliant researcher, most famous for his work on bacteria, as well as this accidental discovery. While researching the bacteria Staphylococcus in 1928, Fleming left out cultures plates on a bench in his workshop over the weekend. When he returned, he observed that fungus had grown on the dish. In the areas close to the fungus, the bacteria had been eradicated. The mold led to the creation of the first antibiotic, penicillin. Without Fleming's mistake, the history of medicine in the last century would look very different, and many who lived may have died instead. the Chernobyl nuclear disaster.
There has been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union, and the Soviets have admitted that it happened. The Soviet version is this. One of the atomic reactors at the Chernobyl atomic power plant near the city of Kiev was damaged, and there is speculation in Moscow that people were injured and may have died. The Soviets may have been fairly quick to acknowledge the accident because evidence in the form of mild nuclear radiation had already reached beyond the Soviet borders to Scandinavia.
Chernobyl's meltdown was the most destructive nuclear disaster in history and could have been completely avoided if the proper procedures were followed. The disaster was immediately caused by a safety test, which was meant to be carried out during the day with a trained crew. Instead, the untrained night crew did the test, with very little time to prepare and properly carry it out.
The TMI accident was nothing compared with this. I would speculate that it was very serious, and the reason for that is that they've observed radiation levels 10 times normal from Finland all the way down to Stockholm.
McKenzie says the type of radioactive material spotted could only come from the core, meaning the accident was a meltdown or something comparable.
The Soviets were also secret about their nuclear technology, withholding important information from operators and engineers who should have understood them. After the explosion, further mistakes were made, like the nearby town of Pripyat not being evacuated until over a full day later. It was the perfect storm of mistakes, leading to one of humanity's worst disasters.
There are indications the accident could have happened several days ago. It would take that long for radiation to drift to Scandinavia and to make the political decision to announce it.
You can be sure that the decision to disclose was made at the very highest level, undoubtedly by Gorbachev himself. And probably it took several days for the Soviet leaders to decide how to handle it.
A B-Day helped lose D-Day. On June 6, 1944, the Allies launched an ambitious operation to retake Western Europe. Known as D-Day, the first landings occurred on the beaches of Normandy, France. The casualties were high, but the operation granted the Allies a foothold that would eventually lead to victory on the Western Front. However, things could have gone very differently. The Germans' most accomplished general, Erwin Rommel, was in charge of defending the Atlantic Wall against an invasion. However, he had decided to take leave, as the 6th was his wife's birthday, and German meteorologists had mistakenly predicted storms for another few weeks, making a seaborne invasion unlikely. Had Rommel been in command, the Allies may never have gotten a beachhead to retake France. Russia sold Alaska. During the 19th century, the Crimean War caused several countries to begin exerting pressure on Russia through blockades of their sea routes. Because of this, they were unable to properly supply their largest overseas territory, Alaska. To offset this, in 1867, Russia sold the territory to the United States for $7.2 million. While it may have been a smart move at the time for Russia, in retrospect, it's often seen as a mistake, as the gold and oil discovered in Alaska far exceeds the value it sold for. Not only that, but Russia having a foothold in the North American continent would have caused the Cold War to play out very differently. A rushed public announcement brought the Berlin Wall down. The Berlin Wall was not only a grim symbol of the divide between East and West Germany, but also of the Iron Curtain, erected to stem the massive exodus from the communist-controlled East to the democratic West. However, it all came crumbling down much faster than expected thanks to an unprepared East German official. On November 9, 1989, Günter Schabowski was handed a text about new travel allowances, but didn't have time to review it before his press conference. Instead of telling people that East German citizens could apply to cross the border the following day, he said that people could cross immediately. This quickly led to thousands crowding the wall. Unwilling to open fire, border guards let them through, and the rest is history. Hitler's invasion of Russia. A British soldier's choice to spare the future Führer's life during World War I turned out to be a huge blunder. But we'd argue that the most dramatic mistake involving Adolf Hitler was one he made himself. Despite signing a non-aggression pact with Russia, Hitler still considered Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union his enemies. In June of 1941, the Germans invaded Russia. Despite committing the largest invasion force in history, the Germans were unprepared for the Soviet scorched earth tactics or the bleak Russian winter, and they experienced over 500,000 casualties. The offensive split and depleted the German forces, and put Russia on the side of the Allies, which likely lost Hitler the war. A wrong turn started World War I. One of the most famous killings of all time, the assassination of Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand, is usually credited with being the catalyst for World War I. But what some may not know is that it could have been avoided, if not for a wrong turn. The Archduke had already survived one assassination attempt with a bomb by the same group while visiting Sarajevo. On the return journey, the Archduke's drivers, who spoke Czech, couldn't understand their directions for a new route and took a wrong turn. When they stopped to reorient, it was right next to one of the assassins, who promptly pulled out a gun and shot both Ferdinand and his wife. Treaty of Versailles harsh terms.
If you think of September the 11th, but then you think of September the 11th style casualties every day for 4 years, then you begin to get some kind of feeling of what the sort of trauma was that existed in the Western countries and the Allied countries at the time, particularly in Britain and in France, which had never known levels of casualties of the kind that they'd experienced between 1914 and 1918. Remember, these were casualties suffered by civilian armies, not just by regular soldiers, so every family in Britain and France would be likely to have had some experience of someone close to them who'd been killed or maimed.
The Treaty of Versailles was a deal signed in 1919 at the end of World War I, which mainly focused on weakening the German Empire. Despite the Austrian-Hungarian Empire being the main instigators, sending a harsh ultimatum to Serbia, the victorious powers primarily blamed Germany.
We were journeying to Paris not merely to liquidate the war, but to found a new order in Europe. We were preparing not peace only, but eternal peace. There was about us the halo of some divine mission. We must be alert, stern, righteous, and ascetic, for we were bent on doing great, permanent, and noble things.
The League of Nations was so important to Wilson that he chaired the commission deciding its structure. Meetings took place in room 351 at the Crillon, the suite of Colonel House, the president's closest advisor.
They had to accept full responsibility for starting the war and were made to pay enormous reparations. This crippled their economy and fostered resentment towards the victorious powers, which eventually led to Hitler's rise to power and World War II. If the Allies had adopted a less punitive approach, like the US did to Japan after World War II, the devastating Second War and the rise of Nazi Germany might have been alternate history.
For 6 months, it was the closest we have ever had to a world government, and I don't suspect we'll ever have anything like it again. You can imagine all the most powerful people in the world here, prime ministers, kings, presidents, foreign secretaries, plus all the people who came because they were here. You had suffragettes coming, you had African Americans, you had black Africans, you had the Koreans who came from Siberia. Unfortunately, they got there too late because they started out by dog sled and it was too slow. But everybody came here, and so for 6 months, this was the world government.
Napoleon invades Russia.
I must wipe away my melancholy and begin the march to Moscow. I've convinced the heads of Europe of this resolution, and so I command the combined forces of France, Austria, Italy, Germany, and Poland. I see nothing but success in my future.
In 1812, Napoleon famously declared war on Russia, citing their refusal to comply with the continental system. He brought around 500,000 soldiers from all across Europe to the border and proceeded to march them to Moscow. The Russian defense was confused with no planned resistance, with their eventual scorched earth tactic being largely improvised.
I'm writing to you because I've just won a great battle today. Tomorrow we will resume our advance. Moscow is now only 200 miles away, and I think of you all the while. All yours.
At the Battle of Borodino, Napoleon abandoned his usual cunning tactics and ordered a direct assault instead. The French won and Moscow was taken, but Little Boney never received the peace deal he expected. Eventually, winter took hold, and Napoleon embarked upon one of history's most disastrous retreats, costing him his army and ultimately his empire.
Fortune has abandoned me. I know that it is what fate has for me. Your words rattle in my head. I am nothing without you.
Of the 600,000 men you sent to Russia, only 40,000 have returned. Therefore, you have been exiled. In no uncertain terms. The Allied coalition of Austria, Prussia, Russia, and England, and with the agreement of the French Council, grant you sovereignty of the island of Elba.
Christopher Columbus was bad at math. This Italian explorer was long portrayed as a hero and the discoverer of the Americas. Nowadays, a lot more attention has been paid to his brutal treatment of indigenous peoples. But his most celebrated feat, sailing across the Atlantic Ocean in search of Asia, actually came about due to his mistaken belief that the Earth is a lot smaller than it really is. He arrived at this conclusion by using a mishmash of different estimates, as well as his own erroneous beliefs. If not for Spain's dire need for spices, he probably never would have gotten a single ship, much less 3. What do you think was the most impactful mistake a human ever made?
He'd rather burn his own city than negotiate with me. I didn't think he had the courage. Well, we'll go to St. Petersburg and have him burn that too.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this special eye-opening look at all the things that changed history forever. Thanks for watching. I've been Matt for Watch Mojo, and I'll see you next time.